All right, Marion's got a smile because we're on time, so congratulations to everybody. While we're waiting, I just thought that was a great session. We talked about everything from fetal tracheal occlusion to CDH to esophageal atresia to appendicitis to pilonidal disease. We heard presentations from the States, from Great Britain, from Africa. We have really, really cool jobs, that's all I'm going to say. See, do we have the introduction slides? Keep going. There we go. All right, we heard last year that we need more clinical stuff, so I'd like to start the introduction with a chest x-ray. What is the best way to treat this child? You can just shout it out. OR? What would you do in the OR? Removal, endoscopy. Does anybody do the topical stuff, the honey or the acetic acids? Yes? No? You're all wrong. That is not the best way to take care of this problem. The best way to take care of this problem is to not have this toddler ingest this button in the first place, right? Come on. You guys may be interested to know that your association filed an amicus brief with the Supreme Court of the United States regarding the ingestion of magnets this year, our first Supreme Court brief of all time. The best way to prevent this problem, the best way to take care of this problem is to prevent it. Let me show you another chest x-ray. What's the best way to take care of this problem? Is to keep this kid from getting shot. Come on, that is the way to do it. It's my honor to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Annie Andrews. Annie did training in Cincinnati. She's now a clinical professor of pediatrics at the George Washington University in DC. She's a pediatric hospitalist at the Children's National Medical Center. She has a CV that has zillions of grants and millions of publications. She's the CEO of Their Future, Our Vote, Senior Advisor to Every Town for Gun Safety, and Moms Demand Action. I didn't invite her to be our keynote speaker because of her CV. It's great, but that's not why she's here. I invited her because I think she gets it. She's figured it out. I hear so many complaints from our APSA members that we're too small an organization to have an advocacy program. We don't have enough money to spend to get lobbyists and all those other things. We don't have the time to spend on advocacy issues. We're too busy taking care of patients. I don't think that's true at all. We are a credible, passionate, energetic. When you walk into the room, whether that's a legislative hearing or a cocktail party at home, you are the expert on these issues, and people want to hear what you have to say. I think Annie gets it, and that's why I've asked her to talk to us. So please welcome Annie Andrews.
Good morning. Thank you for that. Well, that's a picture of me. Thank you for that incredibly kind introduction. It is truly an honor to be here. This is an incredible opportunity for me to speak to a room full of pediatric surgeons. Pediatric surgeons are not just general surgeons for smaller patients. I know that from my 15 years practicing pediatric hospital medicine. You all are built different. Your calling is different. You're not in it for prestige or ego or money. You're in it for kids. And I see that, and I understand that, I respect that, and I identify with that. So thank you so much for everything you do for America's children. In the traditional sense, I have nothing to disclose, but I'm going to disclose a lot about my personal story to you today, because I believe that my story and what I have learned in this evolution of my professional life can help you understand how you can tap in to all of the untapped power that resides in this room. I took a series of very dramatic pivots in my life, and in doing so, I had a lot to lose, and I lost a lot, more than most people will probably ever know. I get asked frequently Now, knowing what I know now, would I do it all over again? And unequivocally, 100% the answer is yes, because our kids are worth it, and I believe in this mission more than I ever have before, standing before you today. So this is not a talk about pediatric firearm injury epidemiology. I don't need to teach you about that. You all are the experts. You are on the front lines. It is your scrubs that get soaked in the blood of America's children. Some of you may be thinking, wow, Annie, that's an incredibly dramatic way to say that. And I would push back and ask you, is there a way to over-dramatize the death of any child in this country? And the answer is no. So I'm going to talk to you about how to become an effective physician advocate. We're going to touch on some of the very broad and deep systemic issues that children in this country face. And most importantly, I want to justify political action on behalf of America's children. Several years ago, I used to very deliberately avoid the use of the word politics when I gave talks like this. And thank you to Dr. Roberts for making me not the first person to say the word politics into this microphone today. I used to stick with the safe words, advocacy and policy. But playing it safe is not working for America's children. Every single person in this room has access to social capital and professional capital. The majority of you are in a position to take risks, to push boundaries, and to stop playing it safe. And that's exactly what our children demand of us in this moment in time. There is an ocean of difference between using kids for politics and using politics for kids. I get accused almost daily of using my own 3 children and every child in this country for my own political benefit. And as a mother and a pediatrician, that is probably the most offensive thing you could say to me, especially considering that that is exactly the opposite of what I am trying to do. What I am trying to do is something that has not been done in this country before, which is to engage politically on behalf of our children, to create a political movement in this country that centers our children. We all know, whether we realize it or not, what it looks like when politicians use our kids for their politics. That looks like book bans. That looks like bans on gender-affirming care. That looks like promoting child marriage. That looks like rolling back child labor laws. That looks like 2 out of 3 of our 2024 presidential candidates being openly anti-vax. Things have gotten more and more urgent by the day for America's children, and it is on us to solve this problem. So some of you may still be thinking, who am I and why in the world is a pediatric hospitalist talking to me? So first and foremost, I am a mom, and being a mom makes me brave enough to stand in front of this room, in front of all of you, to talk to you about this topic I am so deeply passionate about. I am a pediatrician. Being a pediatrician makes me informed enough to do this and drives the passion that keeps me going every day in this work. I am also a researcher. I'm a health services researcher, and being a researcher also makes me informed, and it makes me open-minded enough to have these conversations. And now I'm a former congressional candidate. I'm a gun violence prevention advocate. I am the founder of our nation's only political action committee for children. I'm a public speaker, possibly an internet comedian, and an online friend of Mark Hamill. Now, if you don't know what in the world I'm talking about, I'm not going to get into that now. But what I'm going to tell you is I've learned some really important lessons the past few months. And that is, we must push ourselves outside of our comfort zone. We must think outside the box. We must look for any door that can be knocked down and knock it down, even if it's not the path we anticipated choosing. Because the goal is to get people to listen to us and to care about the things we care about. If that means I have to become an internet comedian, I will do that for the kids. So back to my kids. My 3 kids are the reason I do everything I do. Becoming a mother forced me to engage with the political system in this country in a way I never anticipated engaging. And this is not to say you must be a parent to care. You all are in a child-facing profession, so by definition, you already care. To dive a little deeper into how I transitioned from a very traditional academic pediatric hospitalist to the person that I am standing in front of you today, there's really 2 events in my life I have to talk about. On November 2nd, 2016, my youngest child, my second daughter, was born. Exactly 6 days later was the presidential election. I was up late that night, nursing Evelyn, watching the returns of the presidential election, looking at my sweet baby girl's face, and I remember vividly thinking, what have I done? I've just brought a second daughter, another baby girl, into this world, and I'm not sure this country is the country that I thought it was. And in that moment, a little spark lit inside me, and I knew that eventually I was gonna have to do more to build the world and to build the country that I believe my children deserve to grow up in. And if you fast forward exactly 6 years from that night, I was on the ballot in South Carolina's 1st congressional district as the Democratic nominee for Congress. Now, I don't expect you all to hear this talk today and go to your election headquarters at home and file to run for office, but I guarantee you there is more than one future political candidate in this room. But I show this timeline because I think it's important to understand how fast things can change and how quickly you can evolve to lean into your passions to make the difference you want to make. So in a matter of 6 years and 6 days exactly, I went from a mom of 3, a mom of a newborn, a traditional academic pediatric hospitalist, to a candidate for Congress. And I did that because my passion drives me to wake up every morning and do this work. So I don't expect you all to run for office, but I expect you to leave today and consider ways in which you can dial up your engagement on behalf of America's children. You all are busy. You're educators, you're researchers, you're surgeons, you're busy. I get it. But we all have space to dial up our engagement on behalf of our children. The second turning point for me was February 14th, 2018, which was the day of the tragic shooting at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. Now, I didn't know anyone who was in the building that day. I didn't know anyone who lost their life that day. I'm very grateful to call some of the victims' families and some of the other students my friends and colleagues now. But for me as a mother, this shooting just hit me different because my oldest child was in kindergarten that year. So it was the first time I experienced a mass school shooting as the mother of a school-aged child. So in the days following that shooting, as I was dropping my daughter off at elementary school, watching her get out of the car with her bright pink unicorn backpack on, marching into that school building, not knowing all of the ways in which all of the adults in her life had failed her to the point that she might not be safe in that building. And what's more, that she has certainly been robbed of her sense of psychological and physical safety in that building. So as a mother, I felt incredibly vulnerable, angry, and motivated, all wrapped up into one. So I went home, and I was engaged enough in politics at that time to have my senator's numbers, office numbers, saved in my phone. So I went home, and I called Senator Lindsey Graham's office and left a voicemail. I called Senator Tim Scott's office and had a conversation with a staffer. And I said, I'm a mom, I'm a pediatrician, I'm tired of seeing kids getting shot, I'm worried about my own kids. Surely this is the moment that the senator is going to change how he talks about this issue. And surely this is the moment that he is going to legislate on behalf of America's youth. And I could not have been dismissed more rapidly. I was told he's a Second Amendment guy, there was no conversation to be had, and I hung up the phone. And I remember exactly where I was standing. I was standing in my bathroom at home, and I started to cry, which I am not an overly emotional person. And that reaction told me that there was something going on inside of me and I had to get involved. So I quickly went over to my computer, I got on Facebook, I found the local chapter of Moms Demand Action. I found out when their next meeting was, I put it on my calendar, and I went to that meeting. I went to that meeting after a long day of working at the Children's Hospital. I wanted to go home to my own 3 kids, but I forced myself, an introvert and non-joiner, I forced myself to walk into that room and to sit down in that meeting. And doing that one small thing truly changed the trajectory of my professional life. And if I had not walked into that room that night, everything I've done since then would not have happened. And that is how you can turn one small action into something much, much bigger. As I sat in that room, the leader of the chapter said, "We have a gun safety program called Be Smart, and we've been trying to make connections at the local children's hospital for years, but it's incredibly difficult for us to break through into that institution." So I raised my hand and I said, "Well, I've worked there for almost a decade. I can certainly help you." And that's how I found my lane. And as someone who needed to feel concretely how I could help this organization, it was perfect because I saw a very tangible way that I could help expedite progress on this issue that was growing so important to me by leaning into the access points that I have in my community that this organization did not have. So I started doing a QI project with our motivated residents. I incorporated this into my existing mentorship duties, my existing academic productivity duties, and we published this QI project where our residents started asking patients about secure firearm storage. And then I leaned into the advocacy side. I got incredibly involved in Moms Demand Action, and the people within this organization taught me everything I needed to know about the power of my voice, about how to be an effective activist and advocate, and about the urgency of this problem. And if it wasn't for this organization, I also would not be standing up here in front of you today. So Parkland happened. I started doing QI, I started doing the mentorship, I started doing the advocacy, and then I started doing research. As I already said, I was a health services researcher. I studied controller medication use in pediatric asthmatics, and I just transitioned the focus of my research to pediatric firearm injury. And there's nothing crazy exciting about these papers, but this is to illustrate that we all possess a combination of skills that can be beautifully translated into the advocacy world and into solving these problems that plague our nation's youth. So I could have stayed there. I could have stayed with the QI stuff and the advocacy work and the research, and everything was going fine. My institution was happy, I was happy, and I felt like we were making a difference. But I took the next step into politics, and many people, many smart people will say, "Why in the world did you do that?" And there's a very clear explanation, and I hope that you leave here today understanding why I would take that next step. So these are definitions that are mine. I believe they are accurate. So to me, research is finding the answer to a problem. Policy, or policy writing, is turning that answer into a systemic solution. Advocacy, what we do when we put on our white coats and go to the state capitol or go to Capitol Hill, is drawing attention as experts to the problem and what the solution is. Lobbying is convincing the people with power to care about the problem we care about and to understand what the solution is. So how does politics fit in? Politics is changing who has power. I don't have to explain to you how much easier a conversation about child hunger or pediatric firearm injuries is with someone who inherently cares about children. So my goal is to change who's sitting around the table so that our lobbying conversations can be far more effective. Lots of other reasons to wade into politics. As I grew more knowledgeable about pediatric firearm injuries, I could see, as was illustrated before, the very clear link between a state's gun law strength and firearm injury morbidity and mortality. For example, comparing South Carolina to California. So it was very clear to me as an advocate that I needed to go upstream further, that I needed to get to the point of lawmaking electing the right lawmakers to effectively and efficiently address this and so many other problems. And we've seen it work. We have the first ever Office for Gun Violence Prevention at the White House. We passed the first in 30 years federal gun safety legislation. So politics will help us solve the problems that plague our children. Here's another example. If you ask anyone who works in child advocacy what their priority is, it's passing the child tax credit. This was an incredible success, and then it expired and plunged so many of our vulnerable patients back into poverty. The beautiful thing about these problems is we don't have to go back to the lab. We don't have to go back to our databases to find the solutions. We know the solutions. The only thing we lack is the political will to enact the solutions to benefit our children. We need to pass an expanded child tax credit. CHIP, the second thing that any child advocate in DC will tell you is we need to make the Children's Health Insurance Program permanent. Every year, our children are used as a negotiating tool, and they threaten to defund CHIP and to plunge more kids into uninsured status or underinsured status. That doesn't happen with Medicare, and that is by design. And we'll talk more about that later. Medicaid unwinding. We all experience that, I'm sure, in our communities, left millions of children without coverage. Now we're talking about abolishing the Department of Education, these attacks on our public education system that is the bedrock of giving every child the opportunity to succeed in this country are growing and growing and growing. So I did what many would say is reckless, naive, maybe a little bit stupid, and I put everything on the line to run for Congress because I felt so strong about this message and this mission. So in 2022, I ran for Congress in South Carolina's 1st District. And many of you are probably thinking what I would have said if I was in your position hearing this talk, which is, well, like, that's great for her, but I'm not a politician. I could never be that person. And I think we all need to check ourselves a little bit and stop doubting the skills that we already have and understand how our skills that we have as physicians can translate beautifully into these spaces that we may not feel inherently comfortable. I talk to pediatric residents all the time, and I like to talk about the complex social interaction that we experience every time we walk into a hospital room. We're meeting a sick or injured child for the first time of any developmental age. We're meeting their family for the first time. We're modeling to trainees. We're making clinical decisions. We have to establish rapport with that child, depending on their age. We have to build trust with that family. We have to model effectively for the learners, and we have to make critical clinical decisions. That is probably one of the most complex social interactions that exists in society. And we do that every day, and we don't even think about it. And so that skill set can translate beautifully into lobbying, into advocacy, and into politics. So before I ran, I would have told you, well, I'm not ready. Just like we don't think we're ready to do our first case as an intern or as a fellow or as an attending, we never think we're ready, but we're ready. We think we're not qualified. Well, I don't have any political experience. I never took a political science class. I'm not qualified. I'm too introverted. This is something I tell myself all the time. I could not be one of those politicians that can charm a room. I never thought I could command a room. I did not think I was brave enough to do it. I remember thinking about politicians who walk the rope and shake hands, and I thought, well, I'm not charming enough to have that type of interaction. I thought I wasn't strong enough, and just generally thought I wasn't enough. But what I think, more specifically, more accurately, what I know now is that no one is ever ready. We cannot wait for the perfect moment. The moment calls us, and we just have to step up and learn as we go. If you ever tune in to legislative conferences, committee hearings in your state or at the federal level, I do not need to explain to you that every single person in this room is way overqualified to be an elected official. We are overqualified. I also believe strongly that introversion is a political strength because introverts, by nature, are excellent listeners. And that's what it takes to be a good candidate, to be a good campaigner, and to be a good lawmaker. Passion commands a room. How many times have you heard a politician talk and it just sounds like recycled talking points that they've said to themselves in the mirror 100 times? We are passionate people that are driven by our calling to wake up every day and help sick and injured children. We have to translate that passion into this world of politics to compel people to act. We must be braver than we expect our kids to be. My first grader spent her first day of first grade this past fall learning the names of the kids in her class, learning the rules of the classroom, and also learning that because there's no bathroom in the classroom, if a bad man comes into the building, they're gonna hide in the corner, but it's okay because their teacher also has a bag of lollipops hidden in the corner. And so if this happens, they each get a lollipop and that will help them stay quiet. This is what my first grader told me when she got home from her first day of first grade. And that is the reality for every child in America. So that is what we expect of our children, our 7-year-olds. So we must be braver than we expect them to be. Authenticity is charming. Going back to what I said before, American politics are devoid of authentic voices. We have authentic voices, authentic life experience, real expertise that we need to use to solve these problems. Just like everything, we have no idea how strong we are until we actually try to do something. And we are all just generally much more than we think. So I like to include these slides to show you what happens when someone who doesn't look like your average political candidate decides to run a campaign based on her expertise and lived experience and speak in an authentic manner about the things that she is passionate about. So I had no political Rolodex before I ran. My phone contact list was filled with mom friends and pediatrician friends, not exactly a political powerhouse list. But I raised a ton of money. I broke records in my district because people responded to someone like me, someone like you, stepping up and saying, you know what, I'm gonna step outside of my comfort zone. I've seen enough, I've heard enough, and I wanna help solve this problem. And I did it because people like you from all across the country responded to what I was doing. Because there is so much untapped political power. We all have national networks. You're sitting in a giant room full of your own national network. We all have these incredible national networks. We all can rally behind each other because we've seen the same horrors. We know the same truths. We know the solutions. And we can do this together. And that's exactly what happened during my campaign, and it was incredibly inspiring. And I think the most important thing that happened was I got to be a part of the conversation. I got to change the conversation, both in my district, in my state, and at the national level. And this is 2 ways in which I was able to do this. So you all have seen the Christmas cards that some of our elected officials post around the holidays of their family, including their small children holding assault weapons in front of their Christmas trees. And so during the campaign, we posted this beautiful picture of my children holding books. And it went viral that night. I had so many people engage with this because, it's a refreshing way to talk about these issues. And then the summer of my campaign was when Roe fell. I didn't run to talk about women's reproductive health care, but the moment happened while I was the name on the ballot. And I am so grateful that I was on the ballot, that I was running so I could give voice to all of the women in my district who felt like they had no voice at that incredibly terrifying moment in our nation's history. And I forced myself to rise to the occasion, to understand how to talk about this issue, to lean into my expertise as a physician, as a mother, as a woman. And I'm so grateful that I was able to be there for my community in that moment. But of course, politics is horribly ugly, and my campaign got really, really ugly. The primary attack point my opponent used against me was that because of my role as a child advocate in the state of South Carolina, I very vocally support protecting our trans kids. And so this is the type of thing she was posting on social media for the last several months of the campaign, to the point that I had to take leave from my job because of security concerns. So it's not all good news. But to me, this illustrates why we need people like us out there pushing back against this dangerous, dangerous rhetoric. So I lost, obviously. And wouldn't it be funny if I ended the talk right now? So good luck to all of you. So I lost, and I think it's important to reflect on what I learned by losing. And first, I learned what I was just talking about, which is that in 2022 and 2024, you can be a federal office holder, use a talking point like gender-affirming care as child abuse, and still win your election. And that should be a wake-up call for all of us, that the dialogue is so many floors below the basement, that that's considered an effective campaign strategy. The other thing I learned is that speaking up for children as a pediatrician can be a professional liability. But go back to what I said at the beginning, which is we have to take risks. We have to push the boundaries. Our children are worth it. And finally, along the entire trajectory of my campaign, it became increasingly clear that there was a huge gaping hole in our national political landscape. And I didn't understand any of this before, but I'm here to explain it to you. When you're running, you approach PACs, PACs approach you. Some of these PACs are household names like Planned Parenthood, like 314 that supports candidates like us with a STEM background. There's climate PACs, there's gun violence prevention PACs, there's women's reproductive health PACs. You know what there isn't, or wasn't? A PAC for children. And that matters because if you don't show up in Washington, D.C. with a checkbook, then nobody cares what you have to say. You get the meeting with the 22-year-old staffer, and then the notes go in the trash can as soon as you walk out the door. Your policy paper that is brilliant and evidence-based and well-informed and well-written gets put on the bottom of the stack. And that is the ugly truth about the US government and our political system. And I didn't want to learn that truth, but I did learn that truth. And so our children at this current moment have no political power. They are not considered a powerful political constituency. I challenge you to find a political consultant who will tell a candidate, you know what? We should spend more of that money you raise talking about kids. Let's talk more about kids. And the most cynical people among us will say, of course they're not a powerful political constituency. They don't have money, and they can't vote. And that is exactly the problem. So it is on us, especially us in child-facing professions, to step up and be their voice. So another way to measure political power is in your lobbying budget, which we just discussed. So these are 2023 lobbying budgets. The American Academy of Pediatrics spent just under $1 million in 2023 to lobby on behalf of children. First Focus Campaign for Children, which is a great partner of the AAP at the federal level, it's a 501c4, their lobbying budget was $80,000 in 2023. The AARP's lobbying budget in 2023 was $16.5 million. And that's great. Their agenda is incredibly important. The AARP is a household name. They are a political powerhouse in this country. Their agenda is generally considered to be nonpartisan. It is a priority no matter who has control of the House and Senate and the White House. Political candidates know they need to make friends with the AARP. The AARP's membership is humongous, and they can be directed easily to donate to appropriate candidates. This is the problem. Why is it that in the United States we've invested this much money to support Americans age 50 and older, and we've invested a fraction of that on behalf of our children? We hear politicians every election season speak in platitudes about our children. We are a nation that values our children. Children are the future of this country. But that does not align with our political priorities or our political spending. And this has to change. This is not going to change overnight. But when people ask me what success for me looks like, it's that our organization, this organization that is building political power for children, has the same operating budget as the AARP. And maybe we can take over their office building on K Street, because it's beautiful and humongous. And that's what children deserve. So after I lost, I was standing in the hotel suite the night the election returns were coming in, standing next to my finance director. It became very clear I was going to lose, but we knew we weren't done. I didn't run so that I could be a congresswoman. I actually think that would be a terrible job. I ran to give voice to children. This movement is so much bigger than South Carolina's 1st congressional district. I'm so glad that I decided to run so I could learn what I learned, see this gaping hole, and try to fill it. But I cannot fill it alone. And this is the work that I wake up every morning to do. This is our nonpartisan Political Action Committee's Kids First agenda. Our plan to build a brighter future for the 73 million children in this country. And these are incredibly politically moderate legislative priorities. Pass a federal secure storage law, pass a federal assault weapons ban, transition to renewable energy, reduce health-harming pollution, expand access to quality and affordable childcare, renew the child tax credit, expand access to pre-K, stop censorship in schools, make the Children's Health Insurance Program permanent, and increase access to school-based mental health services. One time I showed this to someone and they were like, you should just call this the sensible things agenda. Because it really is. If you sit down and have a one-on-one conversation with someone and go point by point through this list, who is going to disagree with these points? But the problem is we don't think of these legislative priorities as a cohesive kids first agenda until now. And so we're trying to change the conversation. These are our current candidates that we are hoping to send either to DC or back to DC in November 2024. There are 2 pediatricians in Congress, Representative Kim Schreier and Representative Yadira Caraveo from Washington and Colorado, respectively. The people on this page are all authentic voices for children. And unfortunately, when people like this, former teachers, pediatricians, moms, veterans, when they step up to run, they don't often get the support of the larger political institution because being a child champion is not considered politically advantageous. So we have to make it politically advantageous. We have to make it so that candidates want an endorsement from an organization like ours, and they want to be known in their community as the one who cares about kids. And I can't show this slide without showing your colleague, Dr. Brian Williams, who we also supported and who unfortunately lost his primary, but an incredible example of someone stepping outside of their comfort zone to try to make a difference. So now this is like the cheerleading part of my talk. I don't have to tell you, because you, even more than me, are on the front lines of this. The moment for children in this country grows more urgent by the day. It used to be that people just didn't really talk about kids in politics, but now, as I illustrated before, the pendulum has swung so far that now children are actually seen as pieces in the political games. Because children can't speak up and push back when they're used to advance a politician's political agenda. We have a climate crisis, we have a mental health crisis, we have a gun violence crisis, we have attacks on our public education system, and none of this would happen if children, and those of us who care about children, were seen as a powerful political constituency. And if we continue on the path that we have been on, nothing is going to change. Every election season, things are going to get more and more extreme. More states are going to roll back child labor laws. More states are going to ban books. More states are going to send public money to private schools. Nothing will be done about gun violence, specifically in states like mine in South Carolina. The moment for children in this country grows more urgent by the day. If not you, who? Some of you are probably thinking, this is great, I'm busy. I spent, I don't know how many years learning how to be a pediatric surgeon, I'm not gonna do this. There is no one waiting in the wings. There is no one more appropriate, well-poised, or qualified than every single person in this room to start speaking up on behalf of our children in a political manner. We cannot sit by and wait. I have a lot of people ask me how we work with Gen Z or how I feel about Gen Z activists. And what I say to that is we, people my age and older, helped create these problems. We cannot just put them on the shoulders of Gen Z because they seem really motivated and educated and super online and effective. We have to do everything we can to mitigate the damage that has been done over decades of leaving children behind in policy discussions so that it's not all on the next generation. We are passing down so many problems. And the longer we wait to get involved, the worse these problems are going to get. There is incredible untapped political power within our profession. I believe that there is a hidden curricula, not a nefarious one, but just a hidden curricula in medical education that teaches us that it is noble to be apolitical. I believe that we think we are a little bit above it and that we can't get down into it. Certainly, we should not walk into our exam rooms and start preaching our political beliefs. Politics touches every aspect of the jobs that we do. So we have to figure out how to navigate this political system. We also spent a long time learning how to be doctors, and we didn't have a lot of time to learn how all of this works. But I'm telling you, that is by design, and it is a great detriment to the children of this country that we are not more engaged politically. And engagement can look like a lot of things. It can be donating to candidates in your community that you like. It can be signing up to phone bank and text bank and door knock. It can be using your social networks, your professional networks, to talk about the issues that matter to you. But I have to say, our once a year showing up with our white coats on the steps of the Capitol at the state or federal level, it's not doing it. Most other professions are light years ahead of us on this. They have a constant presence in any room where decisions are made, and we do not. Please understand that if someone above you is telling you to stop being so political, that they are saying that on behalf of someone. I've been told many times to be quiet, but when I talk about politics, I'm talking about politics to benefit children, and I'm talking about politics in an evidence-based manner. And I know that that is the right thing to do. And if someone is telling me to be quiet, what I do is I ask myself, who is it that they're trying to protect? Because I'm trying to protect America's children. And if you disagree with that, I would really love to know who you're trying to protect. So we have to push past this narrative that as serious academic people, we can't talk about politics. We have to find a way to do it. And it is the only way to turn a stack of white papers and policy papers into actual policy. If you speak up, people will listen. As soon as I got involved with Moms Demand Action, I started getting invited to town meetings, town halls, panel discussions, and I learned a really quick lesson. I would be sitting at a panel next to someone who'd been doing the work in the community for 20 years, oftentimes someone who had lived experience with gun violence. They would ask a question, and the person next to me would say something brilliant and inspiring. And then I would say something far less brilliant and far less inspiring, and the audience would respond to me, "Oh, Dr. Andrews, what a great point. It's such a wonderful point. We're so glad you're here." And it made me realize that we have so much professional credibility in our communities, even with all the attacks on medicine in 2024. And we have to lean into that. We have to use that platform, those megaphones that we have, the respect that we get because of the letters behind our name, to help elevate voices of people who don't have that privilege. And that is one of the most effective ways we can engage. Do something. I told you about how I walked into that one meeting, and it turned into something so much bigger than that. These problems are overwhelming. The more you learn about them, the more overwhelming they are. There is a very natural impulse to just go back to your busy job. Someone else will solve that problem. I cannot engage in that. You have to do something. Our children are counting on us to do something, and doing one small thing can grow into something bigger and bigger and bigger. It's a marathon, not a sprint. As a child advocate in South Carolina, I wake up almost every day as a loser. I know that if I go to the state capitol to beg them not to pass a gender-affirming care ban, to beg them not to pass permitless carry, to beg them to stop promoting ivermectin, to beg them not to pass an abortion ban, I know that 99 out of 100 times, given the political climate of my state, I'm going to lose. But showing up matters. Showing up and making our lawmakers look us in the eye while we tell them the truth and the facts and the science, that matters. We have to hold them accountable. And if we stay quiet, if we don't show up to testify, if we don't write letters and make phone calls to our lawmakers, we are giving them a pass when we know they are doing things that are harmful to our patients and that are anti-science. So even if you lose 9 out of 10 times, you have to keep going. And in that, you have to understand that this is a marathon. We're not going to get to the AARP level overnight or in one election cycle. But the longer we wait to start, the longer it will be before we enact real solutions and truly can build the future that every child in this country deserves. I say this a lot. I think I'm bordering on the obnoxious side of this currently. Be persistent. It's easy to kind of dip your toe in and then take a step back. If you want to be seen as a reliable voice in your area, it's just like research. When you're trying to establish yourself as one of the names in whatever research field you're in, you send abstracts to every meeting, you show up to every meeting. You're the guy who talks about button battery ingestions every meeting. And that's how you establish yourself as an expert, as a reliable voice, as someone people trust. It's the same thing with advocacy and politics. Just start talking about an issue and talk about it and talk about it and talk about it. Because every time you talk about it, you drive your point home further and you reach more people. As I started to learn more about our firearm injury epidemic, it was very easy to feel overwhelmed with a sense of despair, especially given the political climate in my state, and especially since I engaged in this work, my state has not passed a child access prevention law. They've passed open carry and now permitless carry. So things are not moving in the right direction. It would be very easy for me to throw my hands up and say, never mind, it's not worth it. But I promise you that that is not going to get us anywhere, and I promise you that if you start leaning into action, taking actionable steps, that is how you can continue to feel hopeful. When I give interviews, a lot of times they end by asking me if I feel hopeful, and I love when they remember to do that because we have to end on a hopeful note. And I'm a parent of 3 small children, and I go to work every day to care for sick and injured children. I cannot lose my hope. I cannot afford to lose my hope, because then what will our children be left with? So, there are 73 million children in this country, and they all deserve a bright future. I know that every single person in this room understands that, believes that deep in their core. So let's build it together, but you will have to get political. Thank you.
That was just awesome. That was so spectacular. Does anybody, we have time for questions. I'm going to ask the first one, and it's really hard. So, Dr. Andrews, you're a very uplifting, inspiring, really functional person. Every time I open the newspaper, that is not the people that are running our country, right? And so I stopped reading the newspaper because I am just totally depressed. How do you maintain your optimism, your hope, your functionality in an environment where everything is so dysfunctional?
That is a very good question. Thank you for noticing I'm a functional person. I think it's the reason we have to do what we're doing. I think because of what we read about in the paper and because of the dialogue that we see happening on Capitol Hill, it's all the more reason for serious people, serious, smart people like us to engage, to push back against that narrative. Because the things that are said by members of Congress today would never have been said by members of Congress 20 years ago. So things are really going off the rails, which is why we need serious people with serious professional backgrounds to take it to the next level and engage.
I recognize Dr. Farmer first, so why don't you?
Well, I just want to thank you. I'm pretty good at this anyway. I just want to thank you for coming here and talking to all of us. One of the privileges of having been a past president of APSA is that you're probably the only person who goes and reads the previous presidential addresses. And what I will say is that there have been many decades of calls to action by leaders of this organization. But I think what you have done that's different from all of that is help.
Thank you. Well, I'm pretty good at screaming. I want to thank you for coming, as I said, and that there have been many calls for actions by leaders in this organization over the years, and there is no shortage of passion here for people who really care about kids. You know from working with the pediatric surgeons in all of your environments that they are an incredibly dedicated, hardworking group. What you've done that is different than all of the other talk is help give us tools. And I think there will be a lot of interest in figuring out how to join both individually and as an organization the concept of a PAC. I just want to share a little history and insight into AARP. My father and Leonard Davis started AARP as an insurance vehicle 50 plus years ago. It is amazing what that has grown into in terms of political action. It wasn't its original goal. It was a way to sell insurance products to old people who no longer had group insurance through their employers. But there's a message there about how to leverage some of the unintended motivations of a variety of people to do the right thing. And I think this is brilliant, and I hope that we all find ways to help you in this. Thank you for your leadership.
Thank you.
How are you? Joseph Fusco from Nashville. So congratulations. I mean, all of your accomplishments are really remarkable, and I really look up to you. My question is, so when you speak to the people at 314 Action and Ben Young tells you, winning means not being able to practice medicine anymore, how do you kind of come to grips with that and say 4 days in DC is what I want to do?
It is a huge self-sacrifice, especially for people who are earlier in their career, but you're right. If you serve in Congress, you're no longer going to be a practicing physician. I know Kim Schreier maintains her Washington State license. She does her MOC stuff on the flight back and forth from Seattle to DC, which I think is adorable and amazing. So it's hard. You give up something. I knew I wanted to be a doctor from the age of 4, and I love my job as a doctor. So to think about giving that up is really, really hard, but I felt driven and called to do something bigger. And I think if you feel that, you just have to do it and figure the rest out later.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Deborah Leff from Chicago. Thank you so much. That was just fantastic. And I want to share with the youngsters the fact that I, as a senior surgeon, have been completing a master's degree in jurisprudence at Loyola in child and family law, and it's all about juvenile justice, child welfare, international rights of the child, and legislative advocacy. So my master's thesis is going to be on why advocacy should be part of the curriculum training for residents and medical students. It's mandated by the credentialing bodies, excuse me, for undergraduate medical education and residencies, and the Canadians have been way ahead of us since 2015 it's been an incorporated part of medical training. So this has been a terrific pathway and has led to activism as well. I'm going to lobby Congress on Monday for firearm injury prevention. But I do have a question, and that is that for academic physicians, the promotion pathway does not really recognize the time and the effort in advocacy as much as clinical or laboratory research. So how do we convince the department chairs and deans that this is an important and worthy activity for academic promotion? Thanks.
That's an excellent point, and I think it's a reason that some of us feel like we have to just do all of this on our free time because it doesn't build our CV and lead to promotion. I think we have to solve that problem from the inside, and I guarantee that people in this room have access to the right committees to really start pushing on that and get the promotion criteria changed. I know some institutions have. It's going to be dean specific, but it is a problem that needs to be solved so that we really do start to think of this as one of the core aspects of our profession, along with research, education, and clinical care.
Dr. Nomoe?
Dr. Andrews, thanks so much for that very inspirational talk. I actually follow you on Twitter. I think it speaks so much about your commitment to this work and to children, as you explained. So much that even though you lost to Nancy Mace, I saw a news item that when you moved to Washington, you took a meeting with her. So it was reported in the news. So I'm very curious about what you actually did end up talking about with Nancy Mace when you met with her.
If you notice, I didn't say her name.
But more seriously, I want you to, tell us about, your work and how you have engaged across the political divide in your work, because you showed us a panel of the candidates that this PAC is supporting. I don't know. I think it seems like most of the ones that I could recognize are Democratic candidates. Have you been able to find any of the candidates across the political divide that you are able to support? And have you found any Republicans that are supporting this work? Thank you.
Thank you. That's a really important question, and I did make a point to say that we are a nonpartisan organization, and we will support any candidate who will sign on to our Kids First agenda. And if we are successful, we will build a bipartisan coalition of lawmakers who support our Kids First agenda. But the sad reality of our politics today is it is nearly impossible to find someone on the other side of the aisle who will willingly support our agenda, even if we took the gun platform out, because our children have become so partisan when they never in a million years should have been partisan. So if we are successful, we'll be able to endorse candidates on both sides of the aisle. There will be a bipartisan coalition working together to build a brighter future. There's one Republican member of Congress who everyone tells me his name because he's the one guy that everyone goes to when you need to make something related to children bipartisan. And it shouldn't be that way. You're right that all the candidates I showed you are running as Democrats. I didn't really particularly care about politics before I cared so much about kids. And it's sad that we have to identify on one side or the other because both parties don't care equally about our children, but that's just the reality. And I got a lot of pushback for taking a meeting with my former opponent who is considered to be a wildly unserious person. But I think it is an illustration of what you all would bring to the same position. I didn't run for political reasons. I ran to solve a problem, and she expressed a willingness to have a conversation with me, an expert about gun violence prevention. So of course I'm gonna take an opportunity to meet with a member of Congress if she's willing to budge on any of these legislative priorities. So I got so much pushback for meeting with her and taking a picture with her, but I would take that meeting again in a heartbeat because I'm serious about solving problems, not what I look like from a political standpoint.
Mary Brandt from Houston, and I am the president of the Annie Andrews Fangirl Club.
Thank you.
But I was actually just hearing a talk the other day, a polling expert who was looking at, people talk about the divide and how politics has changed, and everyone does. It's remarkable, and big point that he made was if you look at trust in science and trust in doctors, it is absolutely level in this country, except in the Republican Party where it has fallen like 36, 40%. So his other big point was, therefore, as an expert going in and talking to them, they don't care about data, and they don't care about science. He suggested storytelling is probably one of the most powerful ways to impact them, but I wondered if you had any comments about this huge split in the way people view science and data and how to actually deal with the people who have changed.
Yes, that's exactly right. And so I had this weird 6 months of my life where I was actively campaigning and still very much engaged in my academic work. So I would go from giving my stump speech one night to giving a grand rounds presentation about asthma data the next day. And I had this light bulb moment where it's like politicians always speak, almost always, without using any facts or making up facts. We take ourselves so seriously when we give presentations. We have to be so straight-laced, with all facts all the time, no humor, no lightheartedness, and we have to meet in the middle, because the way to compel people is a combination of data and storytelling, and sometimes you're gonna have to really dial down the data and numbers and just lean on the stories, and that's okay. But we have to force ourselves to speak in a way that people respond to, because it's important to post your paper on Twitter and talk about your odds ratio, but that's not going to be seen by anybody besides the people in this room. No one's going to understand that. We have to understand how to talk to people about the issues we care about in a way that people will respond to.
In the back, I think is the next.
Hello, Mark Cashton, Loma Linda University Children's Hospital. Fantastic talk. Thank you for making it and so timely and important. One thing that I think we struggle at in our profession and advocacy is how fractured we are. Just in this room, we have APSA, American College of Surgeons, AAP, and the AMA, all umbrella organizations that we can spend a little time with here and there, but it's hard to speak with one voice. And even I noticed on your slide comparing to the AARP, we had the AAP, not the AMA, which theoretically should represent all physicians in this country. So I guess, could you maybe comment on your thoughts as to when to organize within existing structures like our professional organizations, when to strike it alone, running for Congress, founding a PAC? How do you see those two different pathways?
I think that's really an important point. And I have learned, as I'm sure obviously there's a huge role to play for our very large professional organizations. But to move the needle within an organization as big as the AAP, or to get something added to a legislative agenda, an advocacy agenda, takes an act of Congress, which makes no sense. It's hard to do, right? And so when, I had, the first phone call I made after I lost was to Mark Del Monte at the AAP, who is a wonderful human being. And I talked to him about my vision and whether that vision should be within the AAP or outside of the AAP. And he very confidently said the AAP is not ready to engage at that level, and a PAC from a professional organization is going to be very different than an issue-based child-first PAC. And so I started my own organization so I don't have to deal with getting a million levels of approval when I want to add something to my legislative agenda, when I want to post something about a candidate online. So I think that we have to lean into our professional credentials and organizations and institutions when it benefits us, but we have to start thinking outside the box so that we can sort of blow past some of this red tape and boundaries that we encounter within existing structures.
I'm going to ask you to check in with her later.
Very quick. I think that I loved your talk. I'm disappointed that you didn't win, but I think the point that you made is that the real problem is that American politics is broken, and so what do we need to do to get reasonable and smart and honest people to actually sit in Congress and not the folks that Dr. Powell is upset about?
So I think one answer to that is talk about unifying issues, and the number one most unifying issue in America is children. So we have to connect children to politics so that we can bring people into the middle. The other thing that we need to do is, so we're decades behind. Partisan gerrymandering is really at the root of all of these problems, and it's going to take a long time to counteract the effects of partisan gerrymandering. So in the world in which partisan gerrymandering exists, one thing we can do is support moderate candidates on either side of the aisle in their primary elections so that we can get some of the extreme voices out of Congress and out of our state legislatures.
I'm glad to see that the candidate in New York is actually our district, so we'll do what we can to help her.
Wonderful.
So Dr. Andrews is too classy to show this last slide, but I really insisted on it here. We are all super fortunate, right? We are all lucky. We are affluent. We're doing well. And to answer Andre's question, money runs this system, right? It is all based on money. That's what the candidates listen to. That's what discerns the issue. If you think about it, get your phone out and take a picture of this QR code and help her do what we want her to do. Thanks very much, Annie. I really appreciate it. Thanks so much.